Hello, we are here today catching up with Ottawa Police Chief Brent Roalson. I am the Times editor, Tammy Sloop. We also have Times reporter Brent Bader, and of course, Police Chief Brent Roalson.
Hello.
So, Brent, what's your experience been like as police chief during a health crisis?
Well, let's put it this way. Being police chief was much easier prior to this pandemic. Things ran a lot, it seemed to be a lot smoother, although like everything else, like changes in the law or any other modification in a year's time, now we've just kind of adapted to what's currently going on and modified our practices and how we operate accordingly. So some of the guidance obviously given through the governor's office, through the president, or primarily now at this point, the CDC and the Illinois Department of Public Health have been our direct guidance in how to operate, which is kind of a unique thing. Normally we're looking at the laws and the legislator and what's changed, but now it's more along the lines of health and safety, which of course the safety portion is, part of our law enforcement, but it's been quite an interesting run. Let's put it that way.
So, what are some of those new practices? How are we keeping the officers safe out there?
Well, primarily we're using more of the face masks, obviously, the whether it's the N95, the KN95, the surgical masks, all are being used. And now we even have the fabric masks because, of course, the shortage and trying to keep that used primarily for the healthcare. Although when we go into a residence, I know it probably makes people a little uncomfortable. They're reporting something that could be something as simple as a fraud or identity theft. And here we are standing something new with a face mask on. And,
Right.
I joked with Maggie on the radio, and I told her, I said, now we're used to seeing criminals in the face mask. Now we have the police in face masks. So it's kind of a switch when it comes to that. But more or less, it's proper sanitizing. Being more aware and more cautious, I think, is probably the biggest thing. So a lot of it becomes not so much in how we operate, but the precautions we're taking while we're operating, whether it's, the sanitation of the station on a regular basis, the limitation, which to me, I was a big advocate and still am, of having the officers physically there, physically meeting with complainants, even on the most minor, situations, or what we would deem minor versus an emergency. And we've kind of had to alter that a little bit. So it's been a learning curve for me to try to adjust that way and adapt. But again, the officers, the lobby's closed for the most part. People do come in, they report it, we ask them to step out, and then we talk to them outside. The face masks go on. But really, a lot of it is cleaning and making sure that, when we handle a call, we get back in the squad and we're sanitizing our hands, we're sanitizing, whatever the case may be. If we transport a prisoner, then we also sanitize the squad car, the back seats and whatnot. We also minimize the booking process here at the station to eliminate any kind of potential risk or spreading of any type of virus whatsoever, or contamination or cross-contamination. So a lot of the stuff that used to be brought in and you'd postpone now is a signature on a ticket, or just hand them the ticket and it's a release at the scene if that's what it needs. Obviously, some of the things we still do, take into custody for with domestic battery, certain crimes that will, they have to go to the jail and get in front of a judge. But again, we're limiting those type of what I would consider to be non-essential contacts to the best we can, with still being able to do our job. You still have to make sure that any type of traffic enforcement. You don't want people still racing through neighborhoods, especially now when people are home, they're out walking. You want to make sure that there is no issue, with traffic accidents. And of course, we kind of talked about that or briefly through the email. Our traffic accidents are down, and quite simply, basically in half, from what we've had. And when you look at that number, it's staggering, only because the number of the vehicles out on the roadway have been reduced. So I think that shows that people are listening and paying attention and trying to minimize their going out and their activity for fear of what's going on. And I think so the public has helped us quite a bit, from a community standpoint, in what we've had to do and what we've had to adapt and how we operate and gaining compliance. And it's been interesting, but it's something that it's unique. And again, it does show a positive in our community. Just our little cluster here in the city of Ottawa has been great, because the community support has been fine. Obviously we've had to warn people, you can't do this, you can't do that. And sometimes people get a little frustrated. We understand that. We're those same people. I would love to be at the ball field, pitching the softball, but right now, but unfortunately those things have to wait. And we want to do so in a healthy and safe manner. So
Sure.
And you bring up an interesting point that you guys are having to enforce a lot of things that you normally wouldn't enforce. Like just a few weeks ago, you had to enforce access to parks. I think we're still doing playgrounds or no touch. How
Yeah.
has that kind of gone? Can you talk a little bit about how the public's responded to that?
Initially, the public, I think, the full closure of the parks caused a little bit of a ruckus, and that was because people wanted an area that they would walk that was more green space related. So, when we were able to and open that up and working with the city council and obviously the mayor and public property commissioner, Commissioner Rodriguez, we actually made sure that everything was safe to do. The equipment and stuff is still off because of the lack or the inability to sanitize right after somebody utilizes it. So we want to, eliminate that. But the green spaces are open. The ball fields are not, the tennis courts are not. That causes some issue because people now that, there's some confusion or concern because they allow golf courses to be open, but yet not tennis courts. You're trying to eliminate the activity to where there may or may not be multiple contacts. So golf is a single sport as long as you're handling your own, clubs or equipment that goes with that, and you're not maintaining or touching the flags. A lot of the guidelines that were laid out by the CDC and the Illinois Department of Public Health as it pertains to the golf courses are to prevent that. The tennis ball, if you could keep one person, possibly, but unfortunately that doesn't necessarily happen. You're going to end up with 2 people or possibly 4 people playing, and then it turns into, other activity and it draws more of a crowd, which is what we're trying to prevent. And that's the bigger concern. So.
And you've probably seen the news reports in Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot coming out and against these planned 150 people house parties. Are we seeing any of that out here in Ottawa?
For the most part, we've had complaints of people that may or may not, let's say on a Sunday, having, family members over or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
But it's not to the excess that I think the people in Chicago were having. And I think a lot of it has to do with our availability to use our own yards to, the activity, they're kind of crammed in. 1,000 people in a house party is never a good thing, to begin with, especially if you're in an apartment setting that maybe not be rated the floors for that, for that kind of matter. But we've had a few calls for people being concerned about outside people, maybe 8 people or 9 people or possibly even up to 10 people sitting out in the yard. And a lot of times we go through, we check to make sure that they're not violating the law. Or even the governor's order or the mayor's order. Of course, we have the municipal code that can cover that as well. But we're not into citing people unless we absolutely have to. And that's a line in the sand that we hope we don't have to cross, just because we're trying to gain compliance for people's health and safety. And I don't really think that locking someone up or fining them a hefty amount is the best avenue. Quite honestly, if you can gain their compliance and get them to understand that it's really in the best interest for not only them, but the other citizens or their family members or someone else's family member that they could, potentially spread the virus to. So once you get them to understand that, they comply. It's rare that we ever have any kind of issue to where there would, in my opinion, we haven't done it as of yet to cite anyone. And I hope that that's the standard. We did plan for obviously the bridge closure, and that seemed to be a concern that was circulated around Facebook. And quite honestly, we did what we did. We planned for it to make sure that it didn't hinder our citizens as far as from the safety and health perspective, because obviously the resident that would need to go from the south side to the north side to the hospital, we didn't want that to impact negatively. So we had a plan in place, but we also had a venue for them to set up if they wanted to protest the closures of the parks or opening Illinois or whatever the case may be. It didn't come to pass, and quite honestly, the reason we set up areas like that during those type of situations is to not only protect the protester or give them the ability to protest in a safe place, but also to protect them from other maybe counter protesters that don't see it that way. So, we've it's kind of been an odd situation all the way across, because you're trying to do what's in the best interest of everybody. That always upsets someone, and that becomes part of the issue. But we do our best to do that. And again, like I said, I would be shocked if we weren't getting 90% compliance from the city of Ottawa, and that's in anything we do. Really, if you think about it, we get 90% compliance on speeders. The 90% of the public is not speeding or causing issues, and we address the 10% that are. So, it's just kind of changed a little bit of face of law enforcement, because we are taking a health approach as opposed to maybe a law enforcement approach. So
that's a good point.
And I know we talked a little bit about this earlier in the stay-at-home order, but it seemed like crime was down. Is that still the case today? Are there certain parts of crime that are unaffected? I mean, what's the
Well,
update here?
I would say that right now, currently, we do have a reduction in crime. There's no doubt about it. Not necessarily in officer activity, but in crime itself. And I think that's because people are still staying at home. The businesses are operating and they have more employees that are cleaning. So, in other words, like let's say, we'll just use it as a big box store that has more employees that are cleaning for the essential products that are coming in. So there's more eyes out there. There's more people aware, but there's also less shoppers. And a part of, that's a dangerous thing when you talk about sales tax and revenue, for the cities. And but again, that's what you're seeing there. You're seeing a reduction in the amount of people going there. So I think some of the opportunities for some crimes are not presenting themselves because people are out, people are there at home, and they may see someone try to break into a home, or that home maybe, now people are there, they're not at work, or they're not, out and about causing, or stopping somewhere or out to eat or whatever the case may be. So some of that is because there is no, there's a lack of opportunity, I guess you would say. But our officers are still, out there. They're still making contact with people. We've seen some traffic, as far as citations for, driving suspended, driving revoked, driving under the influence of, a couple of them. But again, those are even reduced because there's less traffic on the roadway. So I would say overall, you still have your domestics. You'll still have what I would consider domestic disturbance, not necessarily batteries. But that's just, I think a lot of times people are frustrated. They're at home. There's a lot of stress going on, and we recognize that. We understand that because it's not only the stay at home isn't the biggest part, but you're also looking at financial impact and other things too that people are getting frustrated with, and they really don't have an avenue to blow off steam. For instance, I think a lot of people, you have some beautiful weather out, so you want to go out and do what you want to do. There's some things that are impacting them as far as their ability to do what they want to do. Maybe their favorite restaurant's closed and only does curbside. Well, they like to get out, and why I don't want to eat at home again. But again, it's a small sacrifice right now currently that we're all making in order to get to the bigger end goal, which is to get people and get businesses back open, get people out to where it used to be what I would say is normal, what everybody uses as normal. But do I think we'll ever see what it was before? No, I don't. I think you're going to see some vigilance as it comes to hygiene and sanitation and checking to make sure people are healthy when they go into a restaurant, because the fear of spreading this further once we do get back opened up.
The domestic incidents, have they increased at all? Because now we're all kind of cramped in, is it stagnant?
But, I guess you could use it as a running joke for law enforcement. We always see a higher uptick in domestics around holiday time, which is kind of odd. But again, that's when people get together. So I think the more they're packed in together, we've noticed an uptick in the domestic disturbances. But that's only because the other crimes are not being, it's not drawing our attention. So when you piecemeal, if you've lost, 80% of this type of crime, but you haven't really increased the number of domestics, but that's what you're dealing with now, that increase looks like that's what we're heavily focused on or heavily getting calls on. Obviously the concerns with domestic violence because of the close proximity of everybody being together, but also child abuse and cases like that. Those become more significant because there's a lot of stress in the home right now. And we understand that. That doesn't excuse any type of crime. But again, it does factor in and it does cause, that issue. So.
Okay. In looking at the extended stay-at-home order that went into effect last Friday and the mandate to wear masks inside stores, there was a level of frustration throughout the state, not necessarily locally, about who would enforce that. And I think there's still some confusion out there. Have you received any calls from business owners out this way, just wondering how to address that if there is an incident?
We have, and actually you have to remember that they're a private business, so they can refuse service to anyone. So if they're not compliant with their, the mask and taking precaution for the other, they can contact law enforcement, and they can also restrict the person from being in the store, which means that they would be trespassing, and that is an avenue that the store could go if they choose to. Really, we've had 2 calls that I'm aware of, and both have resolved themselves by the person finally putting the mask on just to go ahead and continue shopping. I understand it's a frustrating thing, and some people feel claustrophobic, with that on their face. But again, they're trying to help and not spread it onto other people as well as their product. Their livelihood is in that store too. So what we do, yes, we could always cite them under the municipal code for not following the governor's order as well as, the mayor of Ottawa's order. Those are all covered under the municipal code. That's not our goal here. There is some confusion when it comes to charging. There is not a state statute that or I should say criminal charge for violating the governor's order as it's written. There's not a section in the Illinois, compiled statutes for that. However, through a proper investigation, and if you can prove a case for reckless conduct, reckless endangerment, something to that effect, even a disorderly conduct, then those can be utilized for that. It's just, that's not the best avenue for it, quite honestly. You want to get people to comply for their own health and safety. And I think that's really what took place at the two stores that we were contacted for. And the employees are just trying to do their best too. So, what I would ask the citizens to do is take respect to those people that, they're not making $1 million an hour either. And they're trying to keep you safe. They're trying to keep everyone safe and trying to just ask for compliance, just like we are. When we show up, that's our ultimate goal, is to get compliance. It's not to, penalize a person. And I understand that there's a lot of frustration. There's frustration with our officers. I can tell you that no one likes to wear a mask. It's not very comfortable. But again, we're doing these things now to prevent the issue of laying in a hospital bed in an ICU unit with a ventilator on. So if that small inconvenience of wearing a face mask, or maybe taking an extra 10 minutes, in the store because you got to put that mask on, that's a small inconvenience to pay, especially when you look at the number of deaths that are rising because of the COVID virus, not necessarily in the Ottawa area. But when you look at the big picture, that's what you have to look at, because we don't want it in the city of Ottawa. It's a tragedy in the city of Chicago, or in Cook County or the surrounding collar counties. You look at New York, an impact like that in a community our size would be devastating. And quite honestly, the healthcare system here would not be able to handle it. They do a tremendous job, and the healthcare workers do it, phenomenal. Every day we work with them. It's just, they wouldn't have the resources. And so then, it starts to head out. Unfortunately, it does spread from the Cook County area. That's what it looks like. Of course, we don't have a lot of international travelers. There's not a hub here. So of course, Chicago is a main point. New York's a main point. Those people are all impacted by it. So we need to reduce our impact by just doing what we can. And I think for the most part, we've done a tremendous job for it. I really do. I think the citizens have really taken up. Of course, there's been some hot spots that have popped up, and we fully expected that. We're not exempt from it. I think that's what really people need to understand. Even though we're 70 miles or 90 miles from the city of Chicago downtown, where they're having this problem, it travels out here to us. So we have to be aware. We have to be just as cautious, and we have to be vigilant when we take care of these things. So,
what are some of the more common questions that you're getting from the public regarding either the stay-at-home order or coronavirus in general?
Initially, it was a lot of trying to basically decipher the governor's orders, whether or not they were an essential business, whether or not they could open, how do they open, how do we do this? Everyone believes their business is essential, and unfortunately, the only way we were able to give them guidance is they could contact, the Department of Commerce and really look at the guidelines that they were setting up, or the Department of Economic, I think it's Economic, or the Commerce and Economic Opportunity or something to that effect for the state. They had a guideline, and they had some good guidelines, and that was a kind of a very fluid document that was initially pushed out and is still today. So we always ask that people contact down in Springfield to make sure that they can get clarification from the proper people that are putting these things out. We've had a lot of questions about mixed drinks, with alcohol, and curbside and selling those things. And we've had to tell them that, again, based on the Illinois Liquor Commission, their guidelines are very specific. So we direct them to those. If they don't, we also share copies of that with people. But the biggest concern was really, where do I fit in? And I think, that was the biggest thing. And we did have people here that have stopped and asked a question of, well, can I go to here? Yes, you can. You absolutely can. These are essential things, and there's a lot of confusion with it. There was a lot of issues with inaccessibility to masks. The Illinois Valley Mask Initiative did a tremendous job. And right now we're still handing out masks today that they manufacture. These are not N95 masks. These are just a fabric mask just to help keep the face covered, try to reduce it, if you have a cough. But the fact of the matter is they've done a tremendous job. People have stepped up all across the board to do that. But we've had a lot of people come into the lobby and pick them up. And what I mean by a lot is well over 1,000 masks have gone out. And these people are diligently doing that. And they filled it up today. And when I leave, today, later on at 4 o'clock, that place it'll be empty. Our box will be empty and we'll have a sign up waiting to be refilled. It is amazing. The plus side to that is I've also seen a lot of good people show up here to get those masks, and they're not hoarding them. They're not taking 10, or 12 masks. These are people that are honestly taking one mask and they're thankful for it. We've had people that have, donated to this organization. They've left a box, with fabric and sewing utensils or sewing items. Thankfully, I'm not a sewer by any means. I don't think anyone would want to wear a mask that I would create anyhow. But again, so we've seen a lot of good things come out of this. And again, the community as a whole, there's always a few that are going to, create some kind of guff over it. But the bigger picture is people understand and are working together to get through this together as a community. So, but, to answer your question, because I do get a little long-winded, Brent will probably tell you that, the questions are just more or less clarifications and looking for direction and guidance to comply with the governor's orders. It's not to try to find a way around it. It's just to really gain compliance for themselves. And how do I comply? The hardest thing I've had to tell people is the tennis courts are closed. The softball fields are closed. You break a lot of hearts when they can't play little league or softball in the summertime, especially when it's gorgeous out. Little guys can't understand that, I'd love to be able to say that it would all go away, but, unfortunately this is here for a while, and we're going to have to address it and deal with it accordingly. So.
Do you have any sort of message for the public regarding the health crisis? Anything you want to get across to them?
Boy, that's a way to do it. Just, really all I'm looking for is people to comply, stay healthy, stay safe, and be aware that you're not only protecting yourselves, but you're protecting your loved ones. And that's a bigger picture. You got to make sure that you wear your face mask covered. If you're sick, stay home no matter what, whether you're working, if you're an essential worker, you're not that essential to get someone else sick. So make sure you're, staying at home if that's the case. But the biggest thing is to just be cautious. Be aware, you use proper hygiene. And it's when the chief of police is telling you to wash your hands, it's changed quite a bit, but quite honestly, that's what we're looking for. The public has been great. I ask for their continued support of our officers, for our, first aid, our paramedics, our public, works employees, everything that they've given to us and shown the respect and help and compliance. I greatly appreciate, and I would ask for just continued support in that manner. We've had a lot of people step up in this community. I would ask for that continued support. But again, what I'm asking them to do is just stay healthy, because we don't want to lose any more citizens than what we've already lost to this. So, and I'm talking, countrywide, actually in the world. I don't want to see anyone else pass away from this, disease. It's just a matter of being as safe as you possibly can.
Yeah, well said. Well, thank you very much, Chief, for taking some time with us today, and you and your family stay healthy.
I'm going to try, and I appreciate it. This is one of the oddest interviews I've ever had because of Zoom. But you know what? I'm an old dog, and this is a new trick, apparently. So, we're just rolling with the times. But I do appreciate it. You guys do a tremendous job, and I thank you guys for all your support as well.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Take care.
Take care.